For the ones who know safety isn't a catchphrase, it's a culture. And the ones who help make sure everyone makes it home safe. For the safety-minded who watch everyone's backs, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as safety assessments and training to keep your facilities safe and your people safer. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hi, welcome back to Her Tell. Okay, she's one of our favorites. She's on here all the time because she does that kind of good work. She's a freelance media strategist, award-winning author, not to be confused with just a plain old author like me. Gabriella Hoffman's back on Her Tell. How you doing, my friend? Good to see you again.
Good to see you. I'm not an award-winning author. I'm an award-winning writer. I haven't written any award-winning books yet, or books, period. But I appreciate you talking me up, Andrew.
Oh, writer, schmiter, author, tinker, tailor, whatever. It all works. You're great. Let's talk a little conservation, which we always love talking to you about it. You've heard her advertisement right here on Her Tell for her conservation podcast. We'll talk about that in a minute. You are out in Idaho, and besides the usual fun stuff like, kayaking the Snake River and the beautiful countryside out there, you put some work in. You went out to Lava Ridge and this project that's out there. There's a video to this that we're going to link to that's really well done. You even got some Fox News coverage on this story. But the long and the short of it is they want to put a wind farm up on this ridge. It's a kind of a rolling hill sort of area. Give folks the background on this project, and then we'll talk about the fact that you didn't just cover this. You went there. You talked to the people. But what was the project in its perfect on the paper form supposed to be?
The free market environmental group that I work with, CFACT, enlisted me with going to Idaho's Magic Valley. So the Lava Ridge Wind Project is a really big scale project, wind farm, as you mentioned, that would affect and imperil, to be argued actually, this really sensitive, kind of fascinating region of Idaho. If you've ever been to Idaho, it's a very diverse landscape. You have mountains, you have the sawtooths, you have Idaho's southern region where we were primarily at. It's more prairie, kind of deserty. And this region of Magic Valley is actually very notable because of the lava rock structure. You almost feel like you're on the moon. There's a famous national monument called Craters of the Moon. It's co-managed by the National Park Service and Bureau of Land Management. And this whole region, so you have very fertile farmland, you have national monuments, you have a Japanese internment site sitting right on the edge of where this proposed wind project is. You have the Snake River, you have lots of different kind of facets to this area, this beautiful kind of untouched rural area. It's not a backwards place. They have commerce, they have business, they're largely thriving when things are really economically prosperous. But like any, kind of small town place, they're always affected by booms and busts in the economy. But they've largely been a productive region. People are very easygoing. They want to preserve some of the livelihoods that they've been doing. They really value the farming lifestyle, small business, outdoor recreation. And when they were told that this project is going to be coming to the area and it's a priority of the Biden administration, many of them started to do their research. They wanted to research what would happen if this were to come to their region, kind of the environmental toll that would be entailed from constructing it. And when they did their research, consulted other people who've had wind farms of this magnitude or close to this magnitude, this would be the largest wind farm proposed, onshore wind farm constructed if it goes through and gets the approval. They said it's on too many sensitive areas. It would impact wildlife migration corridors. It would affect birds of prey, raptors. It would kill a lot of them. It would have obviously effects on the water aquifer. That region sits on one of the largest untapped water aquifers, and they have water shortages. So that would be a complicated thing. And these wind turbines would require so much concrete, so many different materials, rare earth minerals that are very hard to procure. So a lot of kind of paradoxes to this. And you see this community kind of coalescing together, people of all political persuasions. A lot of the activists were telling me, even though they may lean more to the right, that we work with people of all political stripes because this is our home. We don't want this to be affected in this way, because once you kind of retrofit this project in a place like this, there's no turning back. It's really hard to kind of recover certain things on the landscape. When you touch farmland like this in this manner, it's really hard to make it productive and valuable and useful. And then just the potential proximity to these really sensitive sites, the national monument, to the north in Craters of the Moon, which is at least 1 million acres, first set aside by Calvin Coolidge, and then President Bill Clinton expanded this. And then you have this Japanese internment camp. We always hear this administration say, we are very mindful of national monuments and sacred spaces, but they put so-called clean energy projects above these very sensitive sites. This particular site that I'm alluding to, which is the Minidoka National Historic Site, it's like a few miles away from one of the farms that I visited and interviewed. And I thought it was important to go to Idaho, not just to be like, okay, I don't like this, I'm going to say it from afar. I can deduce this from afar because I have, doubts about certain technologies, but you can't be a observer and a reporter and a documentarian from afar. You need to go to where the people are. You have to go on the ground. You have to report. You have to absorb the region, get to know its people, see what it's really like. And aside from doing some fun activities, that was just one small piece of it. I got to talk to the people who this would affect. Like I said, I alluded to a farmer whose ranch sits on the largest underwater aquifer. His property sits right next to this Minidoka National Historic Site, which was one of 10 internment camps that FDR, the other Roosevelt, had set up, and 13,000 people were unfairly imprisoned in this particular camp. So they want to remember it. They want to make sure that people are aware of the history and just all these different kind of conflicting factors, and just so much to be at stake, and a lot of things lost. And these people don't want this kind of rural gentrification. I think that's the term that they wanted me to use and wanted me to become familiar with. They're worried about rural gentrification of this magnitude because it would essentially dilute what these rural areas are. And so that's kind of the long short of it, Andrew.
Yeah. Gabriella Hoffman joining us here. There's a couple technical things we got to knock out here. You talked about this being a really big project, one of the biggest we've ever done onshore. This is 400 turbines. This is going to stretch this is going to stretch for miles. This is going to be a huge site. I know where I lived in Germany, the second time I was in Germany, there was a huge, what they considered a very large wind farm. We would drive up to the top of the hill above where we live, and we'd drive up there because my kids were little and they just thought it was cool. That was 120, and that was one of the biggest in Germany. And that was considered, this is 400 of these things. Mm-hmm. This is a huge, massive area. The other thing we got to touch on, this is Bureau of Land Management. So this isn't one of those eminent domain or like this is the government land. So they can do pretty much what they want on it. And the company that's behind this is a New York City company that's coming in. So fair or unfair, that's just the perception of the locals. You know how those sorts of things go. That's a lot of cross streams, but you just touched on one that people probably aren't going to think about when it comes to renewable energy. What does water got to do with a wind turbine? The entire West, you travel a lot, you cover conservation. One of the biggest stories going that only occasionally gets headlines out here on the East Coast, the water situation in the West is at a critical level. Even something like a major construction project that's going to go for years, they've got legitimate concerns about the aquifer. And the farmer that you interviewed on the video that we're going to link to, he's like the aquifer alone can't handle the stress of this. This thing is crossing a lot of streams, and that's why you're seeing that across the spectrum pushback. Not that they're even against it. They're just wondering, is this too big? Is this too ambitious? And is this the right time and the right place for this project?
That's a good assessment of it. Absolutely. And Magic Valley, Idaho is not the only place where this is playing out. There are lots of other places, rural communities in Kansas and Wisconsin and Michigan and all over the country where projects like this are playing out. But this is a unique place because of just the different lava rock formations, the Snake River, meandering its way through. There's a lot of historical context to this too. Obviously, the Western heritage, Evel Knievel had his famous jump at the Perrin Bridge in Twin Falls. And this would, like you said, affect so many different acres. If it were to go to completion, it would be 73,000 acres where these 400 turbines would reside on. And that's a lot of land to worry about. I mean, obviously, yes, Bureau of Land Management lands. So people are like, yeah, well, they can essentially do whatever they want. But when those Bureau of Land Management lands kind of cross over onto private property, or there's kind of borders where there's maybe unknowns or there's crossover, the people who have private property or private land that is situated close to it have to be really concerned, because would some of the construction interfere with, let's say, the productivity of their land? So it It's questionable when it does situate near private property too. So that's what people are really concerned about there. And just the magnitude of the project, you'll be able to see it for miles. They approximate that as tall as 740 feet individual turbines would be. There isn't anything like this in the United States already. A lot of people are really concerned about some of the noise pollution aspects to this because they do emit some sort of sonar that does affect people's health. It's not some conspiratorial thing that I dug up, but a lot of people have cited that's a concern. The amount of natural resources that it would take, and also fossil fuels that you'd have to exhaust to build these and to back these up, is also very questionable. It's questionable as to whether or not this is truly a green project. Why do these renewable projects, such as this proposed Lava Ridge project, have to take up so many acres of land if it's going to be renewable and carbon free? Something that is environmentally friendly or touted to be that way shouldn't be taking up so many acres of land to achieve a certain, magnitude of megawatts of wind energy. Wind is also very intermittent. It's not a reliable energy source. The Western United States is susceptible to earthquakes, other natural disasters. I don't know if that's really factored into it as much, but yes, people are just concerned, and they should be, and how many rare earth minerals in terms of tons and supplies are going to be used when they don't even want to do permitting reform. Like I said, there's so many paradoxes to this. People are going to see this from their homes. You're going to see it from as far away from craters of the moon, like I told you, that national monument. And when people go to this region of Idaho, they don't want to see skyscrapers or tall structures. They want to enjoy nature. They want to be off the beaten path. And like I said, this is what rural gentrification would look like. It's bringing ugly aspects into these areas that kind of want to be left alone and untouched and kind of preserved. So that's what I think the locals were really concerned about. And like I said, it's almost a consensus of locals opposing this. You have these people coming from out of state, like you said, New York. They created a shell company saying that we're for the vested interests of the locals, when obviously that's not the case. When one of the company representatives was probed about where is this energy going to go to when it's potentially generated, or if it is ever generated, and they found out that most of this energy is not going to even be enjoyed by Idahoans. It's going to go to California and Nevada. So that's the kicker with it too. So it doesn't really benefit Idahoans. It's kind of NIMBY types coming to Idaho. They hate red states, but they love their potential to extract energy and then import that energy into their state. So it's NIMBYs coming, saying they love this green energy, but they don't want it in their backyards, but they don't mind exhausting red states that have a lot of natural resources and very arable land to be able to do this. So lots of paradoxes involved here.
Prime Day es el 16 y 17 de julio. Con las ofertas épicas exclusivas para miembros Prime, recibe el reconocimiento que tanto mereces.
¡Wow! Gracias. Ni siquiera preparé un discurso. Quisiera agradecer a mi familia, que siempre necesita cosas. También a Sam, mi repartidor, por entregarme todas mis ofertas increíbles tan rápido. ¡Te adoro, Sam! ¡Mua!
Compra ofertas en electrónicos, hogar y más este Prime Day, del 16 al 17 de julio.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Yeah, and the reason we're talking about this, Gabriella Hoffman joining us, again, this is Idaho, so you're like, well, what do I care about Idaho? Because this is something we're going to see over and over again, and we've seen this before already. We all know that green energy is going to come at some point. We have the argument of how close we are to that, how far we are from that. We can discuss that, but we know there's a movement towards that. We know the government is involved in this. We know big business is involved in this, and we know there's regulation involved in it. So how all that's going to affect you where you live at some points. That's why we're having this conversation. I'm reading through the material on this, and you linked to a lot of it, and you referred to a lot of it in your video reporting on this. It's really interesting. Even the government can't get on the same page on this. The National Park Service had concerns. They were advocating for, hey, can we divide, because there's so much land. Again, this is Bureau of Land Management, so the actual ownership of the land isn't the issue. They're not doing eminent domain here. The National Park Service raised concerns. It's like, maybe we should spread this out a little bit, cluster it in different areas of the site instead of one big spread out site. One of the local folks, they talked about, not having it close to the historic sites. You can move it back out of the sight lines like you were talking about. There was a local group that called it the subdivision plan. Like, you build a subdivision. Well, you build part of it first, and then you see how that's going. And then you come back and build the rest of it, kind of break it up. It doesn't seem like people are against the idea altogether. I haven't really seen a lot of that. They just want to say in the implementation, and they have concerns about being heard on size, scale, and scope. That's why you got to talk about regulation, because the government, their thing for everything is whether it's a fly or a nail, they swing a hammer because that's all they do, right? This is why it's so important to talk about the regulation folks of this, because even the government themselves doesn't seem to get on the same page. But once they decide, it's done and it goes forward. And we need to hash these things out now, because we're going to do this over and over and over and over again, aren't we?
That's true. And I want to also caveat this by saying that this type of project, if it was done maybe on private land, perhaps it wouldn't have been so contentious. But because it has so much overlap on BLM land, close to very sensitive farmland and historical sites, maybe there would be less opposition. But just when this administration in particular just has, we need to fulfill these goals by 2030. If we don't achieve this amount of megawattage by 2030 for onshore goals, we are contributing to the climate crisis, et cetera. So they alarm and they scare and they fearmonger in this regard. And the problem with this project is, too, I was reading in a follow-up article reports that came out in wake of our reporting, because the locals expressed their frustrations to me that a lot of the local media has just been taking money from Magic Valley Energy Company, not questioning the project as much. Now they started to be a little more even-handed and fair in their coverage, and they started to highlight the concerns of people who would be impacted by this potential project. But this is not really a free market project, and the reason why you're seeing a lot of skepticism with this, even though there's a private shell company coming in claiming to be of Magic Valley, I read that this actually would be funded primarily through subsidies if it were to be approved after this EIS is considered. There's a 60-day comment period. If this is, people don't challenge it and they decide to proceed with it, most of the funding is going to come from this recent omnibus bill. And so a lot of people should have questions about the nature of this project. Is this really being brought about by a free market or a market enterprise system? No, this is government pushing this. And I think when people see government pushing these technologies well before their prime, that's going to create a lot of upheaval. I wouldn't say physical upheaval, but a lot of discord, a lot of disagreement with this, because it seems like a coercive policy. Like, you have to get on board to achieve these goals, or else you're contributing terribly to the environment. But with the shortcomings of these projects, again, wind is intermittent. This is not going to be a truly free market project. It's a highly subsidized project. And if we look at history, highly subsidized projects, namely in the form of Solyndra, they don't work out. They become defunct. A lot of these technologies, when they're created before their prime, they don't work as efficiently as they can. They're not reliable. They stress the grid. And so understandably, the locals are very opposed to something of this magnitude across 73,000 BLM land acres because it doesn't work to its full potential. Like I said, if it was on private land in a smaller magnitude and in not so sensitive areas, perhaps there would be less opposition to this. But because this is a whole of the government type of suggestion or proposal, of course, there's going to be opposition to it. So I think people, they don't want to deviate from what works in terms of energy. If oil and gas or nuclear, even nuclear is the true green energy source, I think that people are starting to come around to. Geothermal is even great. I think in some pockets of Idaho, they have geothermal. Geothermal is actually something I wish people would discuss more. It's very similar to fracking, uses a lot of the technology. It has a 24-power base load. It's not a perfect system, of course, but I think it'd be far more efficient than solar or wind could be, just because you see what happens in Iceland and some other areas in the United States where it's tried on a more kind of case-by-case basis. But they're not looking at real technologies which will have less of an environmental footprint. They're done largely underground, or in a smaller scale. For a nuclear reactor, you're not using as much land as you would for solar and wind. And same with geothermal. A lot of geothermal, you have a little bit of below surface and then above surface, doesn't really take up that much of land. And people are questioning whether or not these are truly green, wind and solar, because of how many vast amount of acres that have to be used. And again, you're going to have to use fossil fuels one way or another. You're not getting rid of them. You're just pretending to say that we are ridding ourselves of it, but you're still needing them to have these technologies function. And so Lava Ridge, like I said, is just one case study of many. And we're going to see more of this. And I think you'll see opposition continue to build because these locals are not consulted. You have these projects coming in like sharks, loan sharks, and trying to extort them and say, you have to get along. We're going to promise you these great things, or else, we'll bully you, or we'll make you feel guilty for not being a part of the solution. And people don't like to be told what to do. It's not because they can't get along with progress. It's just a matter of forcing people off of what works is never a good way to build rapport.
Yeah, Gabriella Hoffman joining us. I'm cynical on these things for a different reason. I'm not against them, okay? I'm not. I'm just healthily cynical, and I need things explained, and I want to know the ins and the outs of it. Here's my thing. I come from the land of the coal mines. I know what a clear-cut mountaintop removal strip mine looks like. It's not pretty. It's ugly. It has tremendous environmental impact because of runoff and drainage and all sorts of things. And it can be deadly. We've had flooding and runoff and landslides and all sorts of things that destroy all sorts of things. Those are very real environmental practical concerns. My thing is, I've seen it before. I've seen these big solar farms. There's some near where I live. They're not real pretty to look at. When you got to clear cut a big area of land to put down a bunch of solar panels, that's still clear cut, and whether it's for green energy or not. Windmills are a little bit cooler to look at, but they do have a very large footprint, infrastructure footprint in how they do stuff. So it's something to consider. I wonder what you just said. Part of the pushback is to the average person, the buzzword of green energy doesn't mean anything to them if the environment that they're trying to protect gets destroyed anyway. If it's destroyed by green energy or destroyed by a coal company or destroyed by an oil refinery or whatever. I know that sounds really basic and hillbilly and simplified, but I think that's a very real thing. When you talk to the people of Idaho, it's not that they're against green energy. It's just like, well, what's the point of green energy if it's going to destroy our landscape at the same time?
And therein lies the paradox with green energy. A lot of what people are seeing, whether it's onshore, offshore wind, solar farms, there's even a solar farm proposal in Virginia that would be the largest solar farm of its kind, very similar. And the concern is you'll have to resort to deforestation to make sure this project comes to fruition. And I bet the same is happening in West Virginia and other places too. And so the mantra of, when you get to the root of this, people are smart. I think a lot of people really underestimate Americans in flyover country and outside the coasts. They're very resourceful people. They're not just random people who are bigoted, backwards, don't know what happens around them. I think those closest to the land, whether they're outdoorsy or they're working on productive farmland, they know what is best for their surroundings. They are very conscious about the environment because if you're working, let's say, in agriculture, your industry is very regulated. Let's say you're a hunting or fishing guide. You're very aware of your surroundings and the elements because you have to deal with frequent encounters with wildlife, let's say grizzly bears or other predators, wolves, what have you, if you're in these kind of areas. So I want to trust, and I look to trusting people who are closest to these situations. They know this area. They live here. They subsist here. They recreate here. And when they tell you that they are not really going along the lines of, we have to destroy the environment to save it, when they see that most of these projects ultimately take that type of position, they see the problems inset in wind and solar because you're not really saving anything. It's kind of a virtue signal. I hate to use that terminology, but it really is, because why would you want to resort to deforestation, clear cutting, and use a lot more and exhaust a lot more land to produce energy that is not necessarily reliable in the long run? And then you have all this impact disruptions to nature, lots of concrete, intermittent energy sources. So people see that it's not really efficient at this point in time, and maybe it won't be ever, because why do you have to, and also you're not really saving much on energy. I'm noticing here in Virginia, prior to my governor going into office, they put very cleverly, Democrats, when they had control for about 2 years, they put a stipulation in our so-called Green New Energy or Green New Deal, Virginia's Green New Deal, that you have to achieve net zero, and it will take a repeal of the law to remove different factors and conditions to speed up so-called net zero. So Virginia is forced to have to do moving away from oil, coal, and gas, and really adopting solar and wind. And I'm seeing in my energy utility bills that I'm having to pay a surcharge for solar and wind that I'm not even using. And my energy bills are a lot more expensive. And I think it's the same. And these people have these natural fears as well in Idaho, because they're going to see their energy bills go up, even though it's promised that the upfront cost may be high, but eventually you're going to see really, really low cost. And people don't like those gimmicks. When they're told that something is going to be efficient and practical, they want to see those effects immediately, not within a 10-year, 15-year time span. And oftentimes for adopting these so-called newer technologies or so-called green technologies, you're going to be paying more in the long run. Upfront costs, maintenance costs, you're not really saving much. And then you're losing a lot of valuable land. You're losing precious resources, even worse, I think, than you would if you were doing oil and gas and coal exploration. That's probably very controversial to say, but those existing technologies, to me, and nuclear reactors and even geothermal, tend to be a lot safer and more practical for the environment than solar and wind. I've become a lot more skeptical of these two in particular, just because of how much land is exhausted and the lack of efficiency, I think, with it. So color me a skeptic too, with these technologies when they're touted as environmentally friendly and they really don't deliver, and they cause a lot of friction in these communities too.
Yeah, this is Gabriella Hoffman joining us. This is why I tend to try to trend as much as I can towards all of the above on this stuff. We should have solar. We should have wind. We should have hydroelectric. We should have geothermal. If we have all of it, because look, certain parts of, like geothermal works great in Iceland.
Mhm.
It's probably not going to work great in some other parts of the country and other parts of the world, right? We need all of the above, and then kind of let the local folks be like, this is what's going to work best here, so on and so forth. There's things like nuclear that obviously need larger controls and more of a federal thing. But this is why I trend towards all of the above on the technology. And I want to trend as much as I can towards local control when it comes to conservation and environmental policy. Because I think, like you said, the local folks usually have a pretty good handle. Not companies, not government people, not investors, the people that actually live on the land, work the land, and have their livelihood with the land. They're probably going to be the best conservationists you ever find anyway. We've talked about this in other areas. We should probably give them more input when it comes to the regulatory state. Yeah.
I totally agree with that assessment. And what some of the locals in Magic Valley told me is that the local BLM people were very much in agreement with their concerns. And then they have to deal with superiors in the federal office who are fully in line with this net zero policy, that you have to do it. You can't contest it. You just have to do it. It's essential. We have to do it to fix the climate crisis in their mind. So you'll even find bureaucrats who live in areas like Magic Valley, Idaho, who do share the same concerns of the locals, because they are of that region too. And they were enlisted with representing this region because they're familiar with it. So I want to give the benefit of the doubt to some careerists who do care and do listen to the concerns. And from what I understand, that's the case here. But they have to contend with federal, kind of pushback and different goals, because they're far removed from the situation, from the area. They don't really come there except to say, okay, we'll have a few photo ops and we're going to meet with people who agree with us, and we're going to allow for debate and discussion on this topic. I've seen it with the new Interior Secretary. Unfortunately, she promises that she's going to give deference to the locals. She'll meet with some people and say, okay, I checked this off and we heard from people, but they have predetermined conclusions. A lot of people on the federal side when they're working in these kind of conservation agencies. But those on the ground who are affiliated with BLM or Fish and Wildlife Service, they tend to be more attuned to the concerns of locals because, like I said, they live there, they commune with these people, and they know the region better. But the federal side, the like I said, Interior Secretary, her deputies, they really don't see it that way because they're just taking marching orders, truth be told, from the Biden administration. And like I said, they save face and they say, yes, we did our duty, we heard input, but we have this predetermined goal. We just have to go according to the Administrative Act. This is a law that is for any law. And so you have to go by procedure, although Biden's administration has violated that with comment period, not allowing for 45 or 60 days whenever the rules come out. So to me, it seems like they're not really, this administration in my mind, except for those who are kind of decentralized, even though they may work for BLM or some of these related entities, National Park Service, those who are living in DC don't really care what the locals think. They just have this agenda, and the locals will have to agree, or they will be, targeted or penalized or really ostracized for not going along this agenda. They'll be vilified essentially through marketing campaigns in the future. Maybe they'll be subject to WOTUS rules. The WOTUS rules from the Obama era are back. Maybe they'll target these people for, I don't know. It's a very sinister thing, but I feel like if you don't willingly work with government to achieve their goals in this respect, they'll find some way to oppose you, maybe make it difficult for you to tend your land, find a WOTUS restriction or WOTUS violation or something of that nature. I don't ever want it to be that way again. But they're really very determined to push this. And it doesn't matter what type of science is presented to them. It doesn't matter the pushback from the locals. I really think, apart from court cases, if this is challenged in the court of law, with respect to the Lava Ridge Wind Project, the only thing I can see foreseeable stopgap to this would be opposition from the Friends of Minidoka, because they love to listen to tribal input, so to speak, but they don't even listen to tribal input when it kind of inconveniences their agenda. But the only way I see it stopping is if the people from Friends of Minidoka, the National Historic Site, overwhelmingly have a seat at the table and say, please stop this or move this elsewhere. For the most part, I think it's going to proceed. I hate to chime in like that, but I like I said, what I've seen from other directives from this administration, they proceed with these projects, doesn't matter what type of opposition there is.
Yeah, Gabrielle Hoffman, it's a good point. We broad brush. I do it too. You do it. We broad brush these government officials, especially a big organization like BLM or the Interior Department or whatever. There's a lot of good people in there trying to do their best for the dude, so that's something we should work on. Gabriella Hoffman, always enjoy talking this stuff, especially conservation-related stuff. You can plug the podcast now. Let folks know where they can find you, follow you, and keep up with you till we get you back on Heard Tell again.
Absolutely, and we'll have much to discuss in the future. District of Conservation is my podcast that you've so generously touted and promoted here on your program. I really appreciate that. We're on all podcast players. We've had a lot of great interviews recently. I'm focusing a lot on interviews, and we're going to be mixing it up with some public policy discussions. I actually have a really fascinating interview about artificial intelligence being used to help mitigate high-intensity wildfires coming up next week, or by the time this comes to air next week. I spoke to one of my acquaintances who was in the DoD, and she wrote about how they're using AI to help combat these really high-intensity fires. Really fascinating discussion. Someone I've known for a while, really fascinating gal. She was a Kiowa pilot, and she's been in the news before. And so we have a lot of really interesting stuff. I'm going to talk about some interesting bills. There was a resolution in Wyoming to ban electric vehicles by 2035. I thought that was really funny. So we'll talk about what's trending in the outdoor news. So I hope your listeners do come and check it out. We're also going to be keeping tabs on what the 118th Congress is doing, because it's divided Congress. You have the Republicans controlling the House, Democrats narrowly controlling the Senate. There will be a lot of conservation environmental pieces to break down. So we're going to be on top of that type of legislation as well. And I'm on social media. Very easy to find me, Young Voices. And I look forward to connecting with anyone and coming back on the podcast, of course.
Yeah, we love having you. We'll keep having you. Always do good work, my friend Gabriella Hoffman. Great seeing you again.
Thank you, Andrew. Good to talk to you. Happy weekend.
You too. Bye.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.
Prime Day es el 16 y 17 de julio. Con las ofertas épicas exclusivas para miembros Prime, recibe el reconocimiento que tanto mereces.
Wow, gracias. Ni siquiera preparé un discurso. Quisiera agradecer a mi familia, que siempre necesita cosas. También a Sam, mi repartidor, por entregarme todas mis ofertas increíbles tan rápido. ¡Te adoro, Sam! ¡Mua!
Compra ofertas en electrónicos, hogar y más este Prime Day, del 16 al 17 de julio.
This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Religion is at the intersection of our 21st century life, even if we don't express a faith. At a time when it seems that religion isn't as prevalent as it once was, it still leaves its mark everywhere. As a pastor, I know that religion isn't something I just do on a Sunday, but it's found in every nook and cranny of my life. Sexuality, politics, social media, the economy, war, nationalism, all have some kind of religious angle to them. And as a communicator, I want to find the stories that can help people understand this part of our society that is so important to so many. Hi, I'm Dennis Sanders, and I'm the host of Church and Main. Church and Main is a podcast about the journey of faith and where it intersects with modern life. I look at faith with a journalist's eye, asking the who, where, what, why, and how religion affects some of the major issues of the day. Join me as we journey together. You can listen to Church and Main podcasts at the website churchandmain.org or on your favorite podcast app. I look forward to seeing you.
Folks, you've heard of Ethan Brown on the Heard Tell Show a couple of different times, but if you're interested in learning about how to discuss things like climate change without all the politics and doom and gloom, head over to his podcast, The Sweaty Penguin. Sweaty Penguin is a late-night comedy-style climate podcast working to add nuance, critical thinking, humor, and hope to the climate conversation. They got over 100 episodes already, breaking down weekly news stories and specific topics, from the vanilla to the ADHD to the international accountability to orangutans. Yes, I know, it's a comedy thing, so just go with it. But each time, exploring different ways we can make progress on these issues while still helping the economy, health, security, and everything else we care about. Feel overwhelmed, exhausted, or excluded by today's climate change discourse? This is the podcast for you. Find The Sweaty Penguin wherever you get your podcasts or at www.thesweatypenguin.com.